And he brought him down here by rail to Mobile and sold him, is it Raglan? At Raglan Slave Market for $2,000. Wallace was sold here in the city to a merchant named Collier Minge. And Mr. Minge, it turns out, and Dora discovered the address here. I thank her for that. I wish I had it in the book. In fact, there are several facts I keep learning on every visit I make to Mobile, and books will never happen if we don't write them up at some point. But
Second edition.
well, the paperback's just out, and we'll get another edition someday. But anyway, and Dora may be co-author by then. But Mr. Minge lived one block up here on Conti Street, 118 Conti Street, what is now the Sanger Theater. Wallace lived there for nearly a year and a half, probably about 16 months. He was the jack-of-all-trade domestic slave for the Minge family. His main job was driving the master's carriage. And one day in what was likely the last week of July, in fact it was, the last week of July 1864, is the then story of his 3-week trek down the western shore of Mobile Bay. What he did is he simply walked south and west out of Mobile. He would have walked through the 10,000 Confederate troops that garrisoned Mobile at that point and had built huge fortifications all around the south and the west side of the city. Huge fortifications, trenches, parapets, breastworks, and all the rest. He would have simply been and he said he walked out at dusk. He would have simply been mistaken for yet another black campaign, of which there were hundreds, if not thousands, around any Confederate military encampment. In fact, it had been slaves, Alabama, Mobile slaves that had built most of those fortifications. He somehow traversed the Dog River, the Deer River, and then especially the Foul River, which he describes at quite some length, his successful swimming of the Foul River, which he describes snakes, he describes seeing alligators, he describes at one point being, quote, bothered by snakes all day. At any rate, half-starved, half-clothed, God knows how traumatized, Wallace finally reached out to Cedar Point at the mouth or the tip of the mouth of Mobile Bay. He spent the last at least 4 days probably of his 3-week trek playing a cat-and-mouse game with 2 Confederate lookouts who would come out by day from their encampment. They had built what he called a spy house. They would crawl up to it on a ladder by day, and then they'd come down. He'd go up at night. They'd come down. They'd go up and down for 4 days because it gave him a place to sleep. Otherwise, he had built himself, he said, a platform on the swamp. And one day, he said, he just prayed especially hard. And the next day, the tide brought in an old rowboat. He said the rowboat was expanded there, or suspended was his words, like by an invisible hand. He tipped over the rowboat. He said he grabbed a plank of wood and he simply started rowing out into Mobile Bay, which is, I'm sure all of you know. I've told this story so many times around the United States to people who have never seen Mobile Bay, and I have to inform them that you just don't take a rowboat out into the mouth of Mobile Bay. But he did. And then comes the most dramatic moment of his narrative, and you can feel him on the page. Wallace had a real struggle writing, and in typically 19th century style, he often apologizes for his grammar and his spelling, and oh dear reader, I'm sorry I write this way. But you can feel him on the page trying to capture what happened next. He said a wave was about to swamp his boat. He said I knew enough about boats to get my front of my boat into the wave and so on. And then he said, I heard oars. And the oars he heard were a Union Navy gunboat. He counted 8 sailors in the boat. He said they yelled to him, jump in. He said, I waited for the rhythm of their boat. I jumped in. I sat down. And he said, the 8 sailors looked at me, and Wallace's words describing it next was, they were struck with silence. Again, I don't know if that actually happened, but if we get the movie made on this, that's going to happen. And I don't doubt those sailors probably were struck with silence. They probably wondered, my God, kid, how did you get here? Who are you? They rowed him to Fort Powell on a sand island. They clothed him, put blankets around him, put him in a tent overnight. The first acts of kindness he'd ever experienced from white people in his life. The next day they rowed him to Dauphin Island to Fort Gaines, a place, thank God, almost all of you, I'm sure, have been to. And in Fort Gaines, on what I believe was the 24th of August, and I'll spare you how I figured that out from the official record of the War of the Rebellion, but it was the only day that General Gordon Granger was on Dauphin Island in that week of August. General Granger, the commander of all the Union forces in the Gulf Bay area, interrogated him, probably because they wanted intelligence. He was a slave from Mobile. That's where they were going next. And as most of you in this room know, the Battle of Mobile Bay had occurred, of course, on August 5th. 145 Union sailors had died in Farragut's successful taking of Mobile Bay, the largest naval engagement of the Civil War. And in many ways, those 145 sailors died for Wallace's freedom.